Okay, so now let's talk about the rack. I guess this is the bit that those of you that are interested in this setup are probably wanting to know about. And the reason why I have a rack, the rack, I've always had rack systems, well, pretty much always had rack systems. I first started having a rack back in the early 90s with my old J&P setup, which I still have. And then I stopped using racks for a while. And then when I joined the Australian Pink Floyd show and they were like, oh, what gear do you use? I was like, oh, a couple of heads and a delay pedal, a Boss delay and a wah-wah. They were like, So that was when I got into putting racks together, and a friend of mine kind of pushed me in the direction of getting the GCX system, which is made by Voodoo Lab, which is a series of effects loops, and it handles all the MIDI, and the brain of that is the ground control pro board. Now, you can get a lot of those systems now, but back then this was quite a unique system. Now, the reason why I wanted it as a rack, it kind of puts all the pedals out of the way. I can access my pedals in a traditional way. I can turn them on and off because they're in a series of loops. But also with it being fully MIDI, like I said, the brain is the GCX. It's possible to label the amp, all of my MIDI equipment, my Captor X, all of those are listed in my list of devices. Within that, they're all set to specific MIDI channels. And then when I'm creating a preset, I just go, I want this preset, and I just scroll through the number to the preset I want, and then just set up a patch, save it, and it's there, name it. But the presets will turn on the loops that have my pedals in. It will switch any of the MIDI that I want. It will have the channels of the amp, whether the graphics are in, whether shred mode is in. It will change my Captor X to different speaker combinations. So it's an incredibly versatile setup in that respect. Now, the reason why I have the rack as well is the kind of shows that I do, the gear is always out the way. So the rack sits down the side of the stage. And on the stage, I just have my pedal board. With the pedal board, I have the ground control. I have my wah-wah controller. And then I have two volume pedals. I have the Ernie Ball volume with the tuner. That's a new addition. That's for the electric signal. And then I have another volume pedal for the piezo signal. And then we have this custom built unit here that actually supplies all the MIDI, all the power, and the signal to the volume pedals just with a multi-core. So the board goes on the stage. It's one multi-core in. I don't need any power on stage. There's signal with the volume pedals, but there's no physical pedals. There's no wah-wah. There's nothing that will interfere with the lighting. The other cool thing about the way the rack is designed, that the amp actually plugs into the rack to be powered. The power of this rack is so clean that I have absolutely no noise. Now, as I said, it gets all of my pedals out of the way. Now, the other really cool thing about the way I've got this wired is that the post effects, the Mod Pro, the Echo Pro, and this old TC unit, like I said, these are going to be swapped out after this tour, and Helix is going in. Those are added after my speaker emulation. This is the magic part of this. So I'm not using the effects loop. All I'm doing is going straight into the amp, and the pedals are all in the front of the amp if I switch them in. I come out of the speaker out, I go into Captor X, and then Captor X feeds into the rack and feeds the signal into the post effects. And then I come out the rack in stereo. So it's a little bit like when you're in the studio and you're adding the effects after your recorded signal. So it's really, really clean. It's really pure. It gives me a lot of spread. The other cool thing is also that Captor X has two outputs. So I can also run just a dry signal output of just my amp tone and pedal tone. I can wind the post effects up 100% on one output, and then I can do wet, dry, wet, basically. And on the iPad, there's a mixer for Captor X. So depending on what preset, I can have different levels of how much of the effect channel I want versus how much of the dry channel. So that's why I run it in this way. So the rack was built for me by a gentleman called Nigel Knight, who I met when I was playing for Brian. He does a lot of work for Brian, builds a lot of the stuff to do with his rack. He designed the treble boosters, the strap boosters. And I was having a lot of trouble with my kind of hashed together rig. You know, when I used to pull the pedal trays out, all the cables would pull out. It was really noisy. And he said, I'll build you a rig. So we sat down and sort of threw some ideas. He said, what do you want it to do? Now, initially, the rig was just going to be a mono rig with 1 amp. So all the effects would be in the send and return, which I still can do, and I can run 1 cab. Obviously, it's 1 amp, so it's mono. And when I was doing tours with it, when it was first put together, the cab would be in an isolation box underneath the stage. And then the idea was to add a second amp, and I could switch between mono and stereo routing, depending on whether I was using 1 amp or 2 amps. But with me getting into using 2 notes and having the rig as a silent rig, most of the gigs I do, they don't want any sound anyway, and we're all on in-ears. So with the introduction of the 2 notes gear, it kind of eliminated the need for a second amp. So I can do all of the wet, dry, wet, or the stereo signals just using 1 amp and the 2 notes Captor X. Okay, so how is the rig working? So we have 2 wireless systems. The top wireless is magnetic, and that's linked to the bottom wireless. So they're running off the same antennas, but I've also got the powered antenna, so I get plenty of signal when I'm doing a gig. They plug on the back and they put that on the side of the stage for me. So you've got a large area of signal for me. I know some people have said they get dropouts. I've never really had any problem with it. So we're going from the wireless. That's feeding into the wah-wah. The other wireless is going directly into this unit, and we'll talk about this in a minute. So we go from the wireless into the wah-wah. So the wah-wah is across the whole the signal. The reason why we didn't put it in a loop, Nigel didn't want me to have a physical wah-wah on the board. He was like, put it in the rack. It's a big resistor. We'll have shorter runs of cable. Plus, you're not going to have any problems of it with noise, with lights or anything. So that sits out of the way. We come out of the wah-wah and then we go into the first GCX where we have all of the drive pedals. So I've got the fuzz, octave fuzz. I think the order of it actually goes compressor, EP booster, then it goes the EVH, then the fuzz, and then we got a treble booster. Sometimes I swap that out. I put the treble booster back in for this tour, but I don't actually need it. So and then down on this tray, we've got the front end modulation pedals. So I've got the phaser and the flanger and the univibe and the tremolo. These are actually being used on this tour. It's normally these pedals that I use. But my main pedals, as I said, I can actually access just by turning on and off loops on the board. So it's like having the pedals, the physical pedals. We come out of the GCX and we go into the NAX system. Now, the NAX stands for Nigel's a clever C word. What this does, it's got isolation transformers in it. So it gets rid of any noise. It's got ground lift. It's buffer. It's got stereo mono routing. Originally, it did actually have mixer controls, so you could mix the effects, but we decided to get rid of that. And obviously, now using Captor X with the mixer within the Captor X software, I don't need a mixer. So it goes into the NAX, and then the NAX is outputted. Like I said, the multi-core is from the NAX as well. All the connections are on the back of the rack. So on the back of the rack, we have the effects input, we have the effects output where I come out of the rack in stereo. This piezo actually feeds directly into the next unit and then to the output. And I've just recently put in an old 2 notes cab pedal with an impulse response on. So I interrupt the signal flow. I go then into the NAX and then out of the back of the rack, that goes straight to front of house. So normally when I'm using the rack, I have 3 channels. I have stereo out and then I have the piezo out. But sometimes if I'm running it wet, dry, wet, then I will have 4 channels. I also have a noise gate down here as well. We're keeping the noise gate in when we put the Helix in. The noise gate is a little bit more for when I'm using it as a completely analog rig with speaker cabinets. I do have the noise gate on a loop in case there is some inherent noise or something. I can just hit that, but I program the noise gate within Captor X. So whatever patch, I've just got a different preset within Captor X. You store the noise gate so it keeps everything nice and clean. So the 3 post effects that I'm using, these are in stereo. These are also fed into the bottom GCX, which is a stereo GCX, which then goes into the NACs, where we can do either stereo or mono routing. We have the modulation and the echo, and then we have this unit for chorus. For reverb. Originally, that wasn't going back into the rack. This unit actually frustrates me quite a lot, but I needed reverb, and instead of altering the pedal trays, it was easier just to put that in. But like I said, these 3 units are going to go, and I will have Helix in there. I've got this Art unit as well, which is at the time of when I first started putting my racks together, I couldn't quite afford a Furman, so I got this one, but it does a great job. So that powers all of these effects units. And also in the back, I have the custom audio electronics power supply that powers all of my pedals. So like I said, it is relatively straightforward. It looks a lot more, I think, because of the amount of rack units I have. Eventually, like I said, that will be the Helix. But really, it's front end pedals into the amp, from the amp into the speaker emulation. The speaker emulation then feeds back into the rack, and then we add the post effects, and then we come out of the rack in stereo. Everything's linked together via MIDI and is controlled off of the ground control. So when I've got my clean sound, I've got an open back 2x12 boogie cab, and then depending on what sound I want to use, I have different speaker IRs. I think at the moment I'm using a 2x12 boogie, I'm using a 4x12 boogie, I'm using a Friedman as well. So, but I've got a few others in there. I kind of cleared the Captor out and just put in what I need. And like I said, it's really easy to set the MIDI up. Literally just select the MIDI send and receive on these units to whatever channel you want it to be. I think this one's channel 1, that's channel 2, that's channel 3, that's channel 4, and then the Captor X is channel 5. And then you go in, name your devices, and you name each one, Boogie, Mod Pro, Echo Pro, and you just set the corresponding MIDI channel number to it. It's that straightforward. And then when you create a preset, you just say, which loops I want on and which GCX and which patch I want. So it is incredibly simple. You just press save and you name it and that's it. So I can actually program it on the fly while I'm playing. It's really that straightforward. Okay, so now let's have a listen to some tones. Now this is the first tone I've got. This is a clean tone. I'm using the Lone Star 2x12 open back cab. These are the official Mesa 2 Notes Dyne IRs. As I said, introducing the Captor X really changed a lot for me because it, as I said, it enabled me to turn the mono rig into stereo or wet, dry, wet, and adding the effects after the emulation. It's just gives you that kind of studio sound. Obviously, there's within Captor X, there's a really good EQ. There's a great programmable noise gate, and plus with the Dyne IRs, you can make so many different tones. What I normally do is I set the amp up how I would use it through a boogie cab as my core tone. That's set, and then I tailor the EQ within Captor X, plugging it either into the Mac or using the iPad because it's got Bluetooth, so you can just connect it. You can adjust your EQ, you can adjust your mic positioning. So even when I'm in rehearsals, if I'm not happy with something, just open the iPad and use the control surface for Captor X. But adding different IRs really changes the sound of your amp. So anyway, there's a lot of kind of 80s songs on this tour, a lot of 80s hard rock. So this is a clean chorus compression sound. And that's that real kind of sparkly, clean session, LA session tone. So I'm just using some chorus, a compressor and some reverb. If I go on to the next clean sound, this is like a tremolo clean. And again, I'm using the compressor, but I can just turn the compressor pedal off. So I can even switch the racks on and off because I have those on loops as well. Now, the tremolo that I was using there was the Moulon tremolo, so that was front end tremolo. Let's have a listen to a drive sound. This is my crunch sound. I'm just using a kind of tight delay. I like a different delay time in each side for my rhythms, just to give it a bit of spread, and it's also quite tight. That's using Mesa 4x12 IR. I can also kick in the EP booster so I can get a little bit more drive. Also, I've got it set up so I've got a chorus on the rack, a specific chorus for my drive sounds, and I can turn that on as well. I can also turn the delay off. So there's just the amp with the EP booster, with the delay, and then with the chorus. I can obviously add other effects if I want to turn on my flanger. So that's just accessing those front end pedals and bringing those into the preset. Okay, on to my lead sound. This has a slightly different delay, as a ping pong delay. There's a little bit of a volume boost there, slightly different EQ, but again, that's using the Boogie 4x12. Okay, let's go on to the next bank. What have we got here? Oh, this is an interesting sound. We're doing a Bryan Adams song on this tour, and we're doing Everything I Do It For You, but with an orchestra, which is going to be kind of interesting. So I've got this sound for those kind of nice sort of ambient swells. So like... Yeah, that's a beautiful sound. That's really nice for leads as well. Again, very studio process. Sounds really nice with that neck and middle single coil combination. So there are some specific sounds. I've got, what's this one? This is a Univibe sound. Now, we're doing Stairway to Heaven. That's why I've got the double neck. So I put the Univibe on this, and I've got like an echo sound. Obviously, that's going to sound very different with that, with the 12 string. Actually, it sounds nicer, that one on the bridge. The way that I've got channel 1 set up, I've got a bit of gain and I'm pushing the mid so it starts to break up. So you can just imagine that with the 12 string, that will sound, sound really nice. Another sound I have is like the echo sort of platter on here with a mild overdrive. So if I'm doing anything a little bit old school, I should also point out that this sound and the last sound, I was using the Friedman IR on that. So it's got a little bit more of a barky mid-range. And talking of barky mid-range, I've gone for a sort of classic, just Marshall-y sort of tone. I know it's not a Marshall tone before anyone says to me, it sounds nothing like a Marshall, but it's got more mid-range. And this has got a bit of room ambient, so... And the EQ is pushing up a little bit more mid. Now, I've also got like a high gain or a higher gain rhythm sound. I've just kicked in the shred mode. So it's a little bit tighter. I can kick in a chorus and... Now, that's kind of nice for some of those sort of more 80s sounding tracks that we're going to do. And I've also got like a high gain lead sound as well. And that's using the shred mode as well. So I've only got a few sounds really set up for this tour. But like I said, it's really having the convenience of everything in the rack, and it's pulled out of the way. I just have the controller on the board. I don't have to do too much tap dancing with it. You're just hitting presets, or if I want to bring in a different pedal, I can do that just using the instant access setting. So the rig, the brain is the ground control and the GCX. And then we have this, like I said, this custom built unit, the NAX unit, that enables me to route the signal in a different way, the stereo or mono. It provides really nice, clean signal as well as the MIDI and the power to the board. Okay, as well as that, obviously we've got the option of having piezo. So if I go on to that sort of clean 80s tone, if I put that switch in the middle on the guitar, I can bring in my volume pedal. And I can blend in electric and piezo sound at the same time. And for that, as I said, I'm using the old 2 notes cab pedal, which is the big pedal. The reason why I use that is because all the connections are in the back. Also, that's got MIDI as well. So at some point, there is actually a MIDI hub in the bottom of the rack as well that distributes the MIDI from the GCX into the relevant units. On the back of the rack, there's also a MIDI connection that connects directly to the JP. The switching is absolutely seamless, and the rack is lovely and quiet. So yeah, I absolutely love it. You know, like I said with the Piezo, I love these kind of sounds. If you get the single coil sound, that kind of in between sort of crunch sound, and then bring in the piezo. I really love that when you blend the acoustic sounds in with the electric sounds. I know that this setup isn't going to be for everyone. Some of you are probably thinking, it's way over the top. Why do you bother? It's just something that I'm really into. You know, for me, I look at that and I go, yeah, I got my rig. I guess years of reading Guitar for the Practicing Musician and seeing the loadout section, you know, where you'd see all of the rack systems and the gear that people use. And I just think, you know, it's what you're into. You know, if you're into using your modeling stuff on its own, or if you have a little board with a preamp pedal, I use those all the time. I have other setups depending on what I'm doing. If you use your computer, then it's great. I'm just into whatever anyone's into. I'm not the type of person to sort of go, oh, you shouldn't use that, you need to use something like this. But for me, this is awesome, you know, my rig. And as I said, I'm fortunate enough with the productions that I do to work with a fantastic crew that I'm able to take a system like this out on tour. It sits out the way. I have my board and I've got all of my pedals that I can access, and I can also, you know, change the channels in the amp, changed my speaker cabinets, everything just on the hitting one switch. It will simultaneously change the tones that drastically. Now, another really cool thing for me about the rig is that I've got a second ground control board. So I can slave off of this board, and my guitar tech can actually have the other board next to him. You might be thinking, why would you have that? It's a bit lazy, a bit ego of you. But on certain shows that I do, there are going to be choreographed parts, should I say. So it's like, oh, the guitar players walk out the front of the stage. So I can be walking out and playing, and my guitar tech can go, bosh, there's your lead sound. And when I finish the solo and I'm walking back, he can go, bosh, there's your rhythm sound. Or if I need a specific sound, if I'm up the front and hopefully when I have the Helix in, if there's some harmony, he can hit that and the harmonizer will come on or whatever. So there is a lot of reasons for me having a setup like this. And above all, like I said, I just absolutely love it. It's just my thing. But yeah, the signal flow, as I said, it's very straightforward. It's pedals into the front of the amp, post effects added after the speaker emulation. It's just being able to give me that sort of studio sound, if you like, and turning an amp head from a mono amp into a stereo rig or a wet-dry wet rig, and everything being silent. Okay, so there you have it. There's a glimpse into my crazy world of gear. I know that some of you are going to be like, you're an idiot. What are you doing? Why do you have that? It makes me smile. I'm a gear nerd and I absolutely love gear. And this was an investment. It is an absolutely beautiful build. I love the way the trays slide out with all my pedals on and all the cabling's tucked away. The power, it's just one plug into the wall and everything is powered. Even the amp is powered from that. I've got a little loom here just with 3 cables. When you set it up, this is another thing as well. It rolls on off the truck. They set it up. He puts the amp on. He plugs the input into the amp. He plugs the MIDI lead in. He plugs the other end of the loom, this end of the loom into the Captor X. And then on the back, Captor X, the red cable feeds the effects, plugs the guitar input, plugs the MIDI, plugs in the 2 leads for the output, and that's it. It's just a 3 cable loom and then 2 outputs. So it's really quick. All the cabling's all tucked away, so everything's nice and neat. All the power has been put in shielded boxes and whatnot, so you're not going to have it and lights go up and down and there's loads of noise. Like I said, I can go on to like a ridiculous sort of high gain tone like that. There you go, it's silent. So it's absolutely completely silent and really controllable. There you have it. So I'll probably do another video on this. If you guys enjoy this, I don't know, like I said, some of you will think I'm an absolute idiot for having such a setup. Hopefully some of you have found this interesting, and at some point, once I get the Helix in, because having the Helix as well is going to really change things, because not only will I'll be able to have different streams where I have my effects and adjust the level of the effects within Helix. There's a lot more effects, obviously, some other fantastic sort of soundscapey effects. We're also going to have another set of outputs on the back. There's a pair of outputs on there, or they were inputs originally, that still remain on the back of the rack, which were for a third GCX that I have when I was handling channel switching on a non-MIDI amp. I don't have to worry about that now. If I integrate an amp that doesn't have MIDI, I have a little Mesa MIDI matrix box that just handles the channel switching. But what we're going to do is on the Helix, we're going to have 4 outputs from that. So we'll run the Helix in exactly the same way as I run these effects, just post. But then also, if anything happened to my amp, we can just switch over and be using all modeling. So I'll have the whole set programmed as modeling. Also, if there is a tour where I don't want to use an amp and I just want to be 100% modeling, we can just take the rack out with the Helix in it and my pedals and the board and the wireless and everything and do it that way. You know, my partner is a tour manager, and She was doing a big tour this summer with a very big Swedish artist, a very big band here. And I went out on a few of the shows and was looking at the gear, and they had a massive rack full of helixes. It was bigger than this. So, you know, even on these kind of tours, if you're using something of that nature, it's still got to have backups and switches and wireless and everything. And the other one that really kind of tickled me was when I saw Def Leppard of Phil Collin had gone over to using Axe Effect. And his Axe Effects rig was absolutely huge. So, you know, we've gone to Axe Effect and it cuts down this and this and this. I'm like, your rig is still massive. So, you know, like I said, I think that's cool, whatever you use. But for me, I still like to use an amp. I think modelling is absolutely fantastic and I'm a big fan of it, but I still get a certain feeling when I play an amp. It's a certain feeling that I don't get when I use modelling. So anyway, that's my rig. I hope you've enjoyed watching the video. Just one last thing. Some of you asked me for a signal flow. Here's the signal flow chart. This is the only one I've got. This is a drawing from when the rig was first designed, and it didn't have this unit in because this unit winds me up so much. I didn't want it in, and in the end I had to have it in. And it also shows it as a twin amp setup, which ultimately it didn't end up being a twin amp setup because of two notes. I should actually, there's one last very interesting thing. I was doing a tour with it a few years ago. This was before using two notes, and I was still using a cab in an isolation box. And this amp has got cab clone built in, but the original cab clone, which is only filter based, it's not digital. And I had this crazy idea to my guitar tech. I wonder if we can drive my effects with that. And so we came from the output of cab clone, and instead of doing the send and return in the amp with the effects, we plugged into the input of the effects and out the rack 100% wet, and then had the mic'd up cab. And even though it was a completely different sound, when we blended that signal in with the effects, it gave us a wet, dry, wet thing, and it sounded unbelievable. And that was kind of the idea, where the idea came from, of going, hang on, if I can do that with a cab and the onboard emulation, what will I be able to do utilising a two notes unit? And at the time it was going to be the rack unit. I have one of those, and then obviously when Captor X came out, it was like, yeah, there you go. Everything's, you know, nice and small and compact. I don't have to have another rack, and also it's fully programmable with the interface on the iPad. So yeah, it's I think it's kind of a cool evolution of how this setup went from being a mono rig with one cab to eventually becoming a completely stereo rig with still one head. Anyway, that's it from me. I hope you've enjoyed this rambling, really nerdy video, and I'll look forward to seeing you very soon. Bye for now.